Oh, hi folks, this is Al with BaumBuild.com. Here with another instructional video for the BDT, the Bolt-together Drift Trike that you put together yourself. This video is just one in a series of videos intended to be used in combination with the build plans available through BaumBuilds.com or through eBay, username Auto Beverage. This video will cover drawing 350, which is the main assembly for the two-seat drift trike. Now, if you're getting ready to do this assembly, you should have already put together all the sub-assemblies that got you to this point. So here we are at the shop. Let's get started. Here's our clean work area for step 4 of drawing 350, main assembly of the two-seat drift trike. You can see we have the drift trike completed through step 3, and we have our components, drawing, and hardware laid out ready to go. Taking a look at our drawing for step 4, we're looking at sheet 4, and as always it has a bill of material in the lower right hand corner. In this case, just a couple components. We're just going to install the logo cap up at the front fork. We're going to take item 1, which is our logo cover. In this case, I painted mine orange to match the wheels. This is powder coat that I did, but of course, again, your paint scheme, you do what you wish. I glued a white piece of plastic on the inside just so when you look through, you don't see through the logo cutout. Now, it'd really be cool if you were to put a clear or an opaque lens here and maybe an LED behind it. Ideas like that, that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it your trike. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our clip-on barrel nuts and we're simply going to slide them just in place like that. Just goes right in like that, and then the fat part of the barrel will go on the inside. I'll snap the other one on and we'll pop it into place. With the clip-on nuts in place, we're simply going to pop this right in. We're going to move the cable out of the way here, line it up just like that, and push her straight in. Then we'll fasten our 1/4 screws in the back, and that'll do it. And there's what it looks like with the logo plate installed. Got our screws in the back. Not too bad. Screws in the back. Let's move on to step 5. Here's the clean work area for step 5 of the main assembly. You can see we have all our components laid out on the table, including our hardware, tools, and drawing. Now let's take a look at that drawing, and that would be sheet 5. As usual, bill of material lower right hand corner, assembly notes upper left hand corner. Several views here, including an exploded view and an end view, a detail end view. Have some patience with this step, folks, but we'll walk you through it. Let's take a look at the tools that we need. We need a pair of pliers. We need a ratchet to drive our 1/2-inch socket. We need a 1/2-inch wrench, 8mm wrench, 5/32 Allen key. We also need a small straight edge and a chain breaker. Now, this would also be a good time to fill our engine full of oil. So do that next, and I'll do the same, and we'll come back. Okay, first thing we're going to do with step 5 is get our trike in a position where we can work with it. And you can see here I just have it blocked up on my workbench, so the back end is kind of hanging out over the bench so you can work and get access to everything. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our engine spacer, which is item 2 here, and we're going to set that right there over the slots. And then we're going to take item 3, which is it's called a seat spacer tube because it's the same tubes we use for the seat. But those will go in there in accordance with the drawing, and then we'll use our 1/2-inch hardware and engine. So I'm going to set all those in place according to the drawing, set the engine on top, and then loosely install our 1/2-inch hardware. That would be bolts, washers, and nuts, and we'll be back. Okay, we're back, and we have item 1, our engine. Items 2 and 3 are engine spacer and our spacer tubes installed using our 1/2-inch hardware. Now, a couple of very important things to point out here. These spacers should go in between the engine spacer, item 2, those will be drawn down. See, they're loose now, the bolt's going through them, but when we tighten this bolt, that will compress and pull all of this together. Okay, next, considering assembly notes 2 and 3 on the drawing, we're going to align these sprockets up. See that there? And we'll use a straight edge to do that. I want to show you that in a second. But also, something important to note, this piece of the frame is common to both the single-seater and the two-seater. So the slots are pretty long because they need to be in the single-seater. In the two-seater, we don't need as much. So if the engine is too far forward, we're going to have a clearance problem right here, if you can see that, because this part of the CVT kind of drops down before it goes back up towards the engine output shaft. So we can have a clearance there, so we don't want to be too far forward in these slots. So I want to see if I can move that for you a little bit with one hand. See me drag the engine back there? So we're still going to leave plenty of slot, but now we don't have a clearance issue over here. So be very, very careful. That's note 3 and 4. So we're going to move on to lining up this sprocket. Okay, next we're gonna line up these sprockets. The sprocket at the CVT with the drive sprocket on the axle here. Okay. One thing I want to note, couple things. When we set the engine down in place, note that we tuck this sprocket in between these two, this plate and this pulley, and just kind of set it right down over top. So you'll have to do that because you won't be able to slide the sprocket in afterwards. You'll have to set the engine over top of it. The next thing that's very important is to parallel this engine with this mounting plate. So this this spacer here, item 2, and this plate that's on your frame, they have parallel edges. And those should be lined up parallel, and the reason is we don't want that engine to be twisted this way, because when we align the sprockets, we want them to be aligned left and right, and we want the yaw to be aligned. So basically we want it aligned in all planes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my small straight edge, and I'm going to pick a reference surface here on this sprocket, and I'm going to pick the same reference surface up here on this sprocket. Now there's not much room in there, so we're going to use the thin end. And I'm going to come in here and just hold that against both those surfaces just like that. And then once we get that set, we're going to come in here to our inner collar. Remember, these were loose from step 1. And we're going to make sure that inner collar is butted up against the sprocket assembly here. And we're going to tighten that set screw. And then we'll come back here, we'll slide this out, we're going to make sure our key's in place. Then we'll tighten the sprocket, there's 2 set screws there, and we'll tighten this collar also with a set screw. And we'll want to use Loctite on all those. So let's get it lined up just like that, and then we'll come back. And we're just going to jump back in here quickly. We have the collar on the opposite side here locked down as we did our alignment. Now, so here's our key. We want to make sure we insert our key in our sprocket, and we want the face of the key to rest flush with the face of this key, or be in a little bit. We don't want it to be out too much. Maybe a little bit's okay, but we don't want it to be out too much because we want our collar to bear against that. So tap your key in. If it's a little long, then just take it and grind it a little bit shorter, and then Loctite all around. 1, 2, 3 set screws, and we'll be back. Our sprocket is locked in place with the collar, and you can see I just touched up the paint there because of the blackout theme I'm going with. So next we're going to move on to the chain. You can see we got our sprockets in alignment there. But before we do, I want to come back to this point of this clearance here. Right in here we're looking at. You want to move that engine as far forward as possible in the slots so it doesn't hit there, and then we'll adjust the engine back, and there still should be plenty of slot. So I'm going to grab that chain, wrap it around there. We're going to determine its length when we come back. The next thing you want to do is thread your chain around there. You see how to have it around the sprocket. So I just started up here, put my the very leading edge of the chain on here, and then just turned this, fed the chain through this way, and then when I got a little bit here, I just put it on this sprocket and just turned this, and just turned your axle and fed it that way. So once you get it up to here, I just have it taped on there just like this, okay, just to hold it. So what we're seeing here is that the chain is going to be too long naturally, so we want to, this is where we want to cut it. We want to determine its length. So we need to make it so that an inside link is the terminator. Okay, so if I point this out to you right here, see where my thumb is? There's an outer link and then there's an inner link. Okay, the master link goes between two inner links. So we have to make sure that the very next link in our chain is an inner link. So we got to pull this up until we get an inner link, and we see that we do have an inner link right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this and mark it with a paint stick, and I'll do that and be back. Okay, and we're back, and I just want to show you that we have our chain marked. I just took a paint stick there and did that. Now you can use a Sharpie, whiteout, nail polish, whatever you may have. But remember, we have to have an inner link being cut, because the master link will go over two inner links and become an outer wide link. So when you do this, just be careful. Make sure that you have the tension out of the top of the chain, because if that's sagging between those two sprockets, you're going to get a false reading on your length. So with those two marked, I'm going to break this chain, and I'll show you that next. So we took our chain off, and we're ready to break it. Here's our two marks. We'll need to split that right there in those two locations. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the workbench and take my chain breaking tool here. Now these are relatively inexpensive. There's a couple options. You'll see the part numbers there at the bottom of your screen where you can buy these yourself, but it's a pretty handy tool that drives the pin out of the chain. Now if you don't have one of these, you can grind this off with a flapper wheel or a file and punch them through the old-fashioned way, just like you would any motorcycle or bike chain. So I have the tool. I recommend that you get a tool. It's much easier. I'm just going to go ahead and drive these out, and we'll come back. And there we have it separated. So this is the piece we're going to take back over to our engine and sprocket along with our master link. Now note that on the drawing we also have what's called a half link or an adding link. We only want to use that if absolutely necessary. If you're stuck somewhere between links and you can't move the engine forward or back to get into the next link down, then you can use that adding link, but I don't recommend using it unless you absolutely have to. Okay, let's put the chain on next. So we're back at the engine and sprocket, and we wrap the chain around just like we did before. Next we're going to take our master link, we're going to take our pin piece, and just slip that in from the backside through the two holes. So we've got our two pins in from the back. Next we're going to take our cover plate here. We're going to pop that over those two pins, just like that. And then next we're going to take our retaining clip, which looks like this, and we're going to install that. Now we're going to use a pair of pliers to do that, but we're going to note the rotation. So the rotation of this sprocket is this way, so we want this rounded head to be facing that way. So we want it to go around the ring like that. And the reason is, if something snags this clip, it'll snag the rounded end and tend to push the clip onto the chain, whereas if we have it backwards, it might just grab this finger end and tend to push the clip off. So we're going to do it that way. I'll put this on using my needle nose pliers, and we'll come right back. And here is what your master link will look like when it's installed. So we got the rounded end towards the direction of rotation. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to slide the engine back. Remember, let's maintain our parallel surfaces here. Make sure that the chain is straight and that the engine isn't tilted, and we can do that by referencing those parallel surfaces. So let's pull this engine back in order to snug the chain, and then we're going to take our 1/2-inch wrench and socket and tighten all 4 of the engine bolts. Now we may need help with this. We may need somebody to help pull this back and hold the engine straight and square and all that stuff while we snug it down. So do that and we'll be back. So we've mounted our engine using hardware, items 7, 8, and 9. Those are 5/16 hardware, which you would tighten with your 1/2-inch socket and wrench. So once you do that, these spacers now should no longer be loose. You've pulled all these surfaces together, so these are now tight and they're taking up that space. Okay, so those should be tight. Your chain should be tight, and it should spin freely, just like this. Okay, so the next step is we're going to take our CVT plastic cover that came with your CVT. Now recall the mounting screws, the little with the 8mm head here. There's here, here, and 2 on the bottom. Now I don't think you're going to be able to use all 4. I think the one down here is going to end up being not attached to anything. So what we need to do is we need to put our cover on there, and then through trial and error, marking it with a Sharpie or with a paint pen, we want to remove the material just with a good pair of scissors or tin snips. We want to remove the material where this chain will exit out to the bottom. So just use trial and error, mark it a little bit, cut it a little bit, just keep going back and forth until you get that cut away the minimum amount for the chain to clear. So I'm going to do that. You do the same and we'll be back. Okay, so we got our CVT cover cut. I just took a good pair of quality scissors like this. You could use tin snips, of course, and I just marked it from the underside and just cut right along the line there. If it takes you 1 or 2 iterations, that's fine. So remove your screws from your flanges that we left in there from when we did the engine CVT, and slip this guy in place. Put your screws back in. Now in this case, we're not able to put one of the screws in just because it's in the area where it's cut out, but that's fine. I'll put the other screws in and then come back. So we've installed our CVT cover, and just wanted to note that in this area we had a little interference with the heat shield, so I just took a little hammer and I just tapped this in. Just tap it in, give it a little tappy. So once you do that, you should be able to get this screw in, this screw, and then we're getting 3 out of the 4. The 4th one is actually cut away. You can see here there's no guard material left, but we do have a 3rd one located up here. So once this is installed, just check once again to make sure you got no interferences, and we're good. Now there's still part of this chain that's exposed in the front, which you will be responsible for guarding. So next we're going to move on to hooking up the engine throttle cable. Okay, we're back, and you see I put the throttle over the handlebar and just snugged up our Phillips screws. Now I got some tape on there just to keep that from pulling out of there unexpectedly. It shouldn't do that, but a little bit of tape will help. Now I wanted to point out on the other end of the cable here, these 2 nuts that were threaded on there, I removed those. I just put a little bit of heat shrink over the end of the cable to keep it from fraying as we start to thread it back through. We're going to go down through our frame and out the back. Now let's take a look at that route real quick. We're going to go in through here, and we're going to go down through here, and there's an access hole. If I zoom in there real close, I think you can see it. There's a hole that leads to this member. So we're going to thread our cable back through here, and then out here on just the right side only, there's going to be a hole back in here. Now it's hard to see because it's dark, but that's where our cable will come out through, and then eventually we'll connect to the engine right down in here. So one other thing I want to do, there's an overlay on this cable. See, there's an extra right here. There's an extra covering, an extra sheath on this cable. I'm going to pull that off because I think it's just going to make matters difficult to get back in through there. This is a nice tough case right here. We don't need this extra case. It's just going to make it difficult to thread back in there. So I'm just going to slide that right off before we move on. And now that we have our outer rubber sheath removed, we're going to start out by just going ahead and threading this right down through this hole and keep it moving. And you see it trying to come out here. We're going to keep this moving right down through. It's kind of hard for me to do with one hand, but you get the picture. We're down here, and next we're getting ready to go right down in that hole there, as you can see. There you go. See that headed down there? So we're just going to go ahead and thread that down there, make the turn, and start out through the back. So let me keep feeding, and we'll be back. Okay, we're back, and we can see our access hole here. Let me just zoom out, show you where that's at. That's down here on the right side only. Now you can see we reached in there and grabbed the cable. Now we need to take a pair of needle nose pliers, reach in there and grab that threaded end. One note, these two screws right here, if they get in your way, because they're going down through the frame, if they get in your way, you can temporarily remove those and then put them back in place. I didn't have to do that. I was able to thread it through there. So next, we're going to reach down in there and see if we can pull that out. So we used our pliers to pull our cable out through our access hole, and you can see we have plenty extra here on the end. Now back up front here, we want to make this loop comfortable up here. So pull enough slack out of the back to make that comfortable. So when you turn this handlebar here, you don't want this cable binding up in either direction. So see that? We got just the right amount of slack in there that we can go back and forth. And that cable is always going to want to feed down through that hole. So once you get that set, you want to make sure that you leave that there. And then go ahead and tighten your two screws right here to put the throttle in place once and for all. Next, we're going to hook up our throttle cable at the engine itself, and you see we have our excess cable laying there. Now, if you're using the engine specified in the build plans, you're going to see that the throttle here sticks. Now, these engines are used for log splitting and other stuff like that, where you want to set the throttle and leave it there. So see how as I move it, it doesn't move. We want that to spring back and forth so we can use it as a throttle. So the only thing we have to do in this particular model is loosen that nut right there with a 10mm wrench. Don't remove it, just loosen it a little bit, and then that'll allow the spring to make the throttle go back and forth the way we want it to. So let me loosen that up and come back and show you. Okay, so we used our 10mm socket or wrench, and see what happens. Now we got our spring throttle just the way we wanted it. So there's that nut we loosened again right here. So now we're going to move on. We're going to take the end of the cable sleeve and we're going to fasten that right down in here. See that Phillips screw? We're going to loosen that up, slide that cable under that U-clamp just like that, and then we're going to connect our working part of the cable right through this little hole here. That's what's nice about these engines, is they're already set up for a nice throttle. Now if you don't have this engine, you're using a different engine than specified in the plans, you'll just have to rig this throttle up yourself. But I'm going to go ahead and rig it up the way I described it and come back and show you. We're back and we have our throttle hooked up. We have our cable threaded down through this barrel. This takes a 10mm wrench to hold that nut on the underside. Then you'll thread this through the hole and clamp down with that. And then here you're just clamping under this U-bolt. Now, want to make sure that we have full range when we twist the handlebar. So you see the throttle moving there? Sorry about the camera work. I'm trying to work one-handed. But you can see that when I twist this throttle, we get full throttle range. Now, you can see we have some excess cable. If you want to, you can always pull more cable through the sheath and then cut the sheath. But I'm going to just tidy mine up. Remember, they can't hit the wheels, obviously. but it can't hit the axle either. So I'm just going to tidy mine up with some zip ties and come back. And we're back, and you'll see that I just added a couple zip ties here to tidy this up and get it out of the way. You want to make sure that it's not in the way of your starter, not going to catch on any other moving parts, and then just recheck your operation of your throttle by twisting your handle back and forth. So that's it. You've hooked up the throttle. Here's the clean work area for step 6. You can see we have the trike build up, final main assembly steps 1 through 5. We have our seat assembly, which is going to go on next, our tools, hardware, and drawing. Let's take a look at drawing sheet 6 for step 6. We have our bill of material, which is just going to be the seat and hardware in this case. And we have some assembly notes in the upper left-hand corner. Now this step is going to include a bunch of adjustments. So allow some time. We're going to assemble the seat, and then we'll have to have a friend or neighbor help us pull it down off the workbench and make our final assemblies using the intended riders. For tools, we're just going to need a ratchet to drive a 7/16 socket, a 5/32 Allen key, and our hardware is our 2 3/4 inch long 1/4 inch screws with the washers and nuts as detailed in the bill of material. Now this seat assembly is drawing 352, which we would have done in a previous assembly. So let's get started. Now the first thing you want to do is just slip item 1, which is the seat assembly, right down over the frame, and you'll see there's 2, 4, 6, 8 holes that have to line up. So you'll just set that up there and drop it right down on. Now if there's variances in width, for example, the paint's too thick and this thing doesn't quite want to go down, you can loosen these screws. You can access them from the inside here, all along here, and just loosen them up enough to let that slide down into place. Okay, and then don't forget the trick with the screwdriver to get your holes aligned up. You can stick that in there and use that to wedge your seat assembly back and forth, making sure all 8 of your holes are lined up. So now that we have it in this stage, we're going to go ahead and install our long bolts, nuts, and washers, and we'll be back. Okay, we have our seat assembly installed. Bolts just loose now in case we need to take off the seat and adjust the front and back seat forward or back. So that's what she looks like. Next step is get help from a friend or a neighbor, move it down off your workbench onto the floor, and we're going to make those adjustments with the intended riders. And with the help of a friend, we have gotten our 2-seat Bolt-together Drift Trike down off the workbench and onto the ground where we have made our adjustments. So let's take a look at those adjustments. First, we have the steering wheel height, which can be adjusted up and down using a 6mm Allen key. Same here, we can use an Allen key here to rotate the handlebars back and forth, moving it closer for a shorter rider. Let's not forget our 2 nuts on the underside here and here that will allow us to rotate this footrest assembly forward and back. We have our seats that we know that we have multiple locations to move them front to back. We also have the same situation here with the rear footrest. We can adjust these 2 nuts under here with a 9/16 socket or wrench and rotate the footrest tubes forward or back. Also recall that we can move this footrest bracket back 2 more slots. We can go 1 spot, 2 spots to bring that back for shorter riders. So with that, that's all the adjustments needed for step 6. And with all your adjustments made, set up for your intended riders, you are done with drawing 350, the main assembly for the 2-seat Bolt-together Drift Trike that you put together yourself. And just in time, because we're down to our last piece of bacon. So if you made it this far, have a drink and celebrate. And if you purchased the plans or the build kits from BaumBuilds.com, thank you very much. Now please stand by for one last important message. Folks, this important note. Let's take a look at sheet 7 of drawing 350. This is the main assembly specifications, dimensions, and warnings and notes. Now let's take a look at these notes. Note 1, the approximate vehicle weight is 200 pounds. Of course, that weight does not include the rider. Theoretical maximum speed, 35 miles an hour. That's as fast as this vehicle can go using the components specified. Now, note number 3, there's a legal disclaimer in your build plans. Please read it thoroughly. BaumBuilds.com is not responsible for injuries, damages of any type. Now let's keep the lawyers out of it, folks. Let's apply common sense. Note 4, always wear safety gear. Note 5, never operate on public roads. 6, never operate under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Note 7, operate only on smooth paved surfaces. Note 8, now this is important. Although a chain guard is not shown or supplied, it's strongly recommended that you design, fabricate, and install a guard suitable to prevent long hair, loose clothing, or anything else from contacting the chain or sprockets. Now, I'm leaving this up to you because I want you to be responsible for this important safety aspect. If you feel there needs to be a guard, then you need to make a guard and install it, one that fits your needs. And finally, the information contained in this drawing and build plans is my property of BaumBuilds.com. Do not reproduce it in whole or in part without my permission. Thanks again for watching, folks, and if you build a drift trike, congratulations. Take care.